Hello and welcome to the first of our second run of BP STEM Talks for 2014. BP aims to bring science to life for young people, and one way we're doing this is by inviting BP scientists to hang out live with school students from around the UK. As well as being available on our YouTube channel, these videos can be watched on the BP Educational Service website, where they sit amongst all our other great resources for young people. You can follow the link at the top of this video to get there. Today, we are very lucky to be joined by David Eyton, who is BP's Head of Technology. He'll be telling us a bit more about what that means shortly. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And we are also joined by Surbiton High School from Surrey, so thank you very much for joining us also. We are also running a UK-wide competition at the moment on the BP Educational Service called the Ultimate STEM Challenge. This is in conjunction with the Science Museum and STEMnet, and this challenges students to come up with new ideas for working in cold, hot or dry environments. And so David will also be giving us a little bit of info about some of the ways in which BP does this. So Surbiton High, if we can hand over to you for the first question, if you want to introduce yourself and then give David the first question.
My name's Rosie, and can you tell us more about your job role and what technologies you are currently excited about?
Yes, I certainly can. Hello, everyone. My job is the Head of Technology in BP, and that means that there are a few thousand people in BP who are trying to think about how we can find oil and gas better, how we can convert it into things that you can use better, and a little bit also about where the whole world of energy is going in the future and how we can play into that. And we spend probably approaching £1 billion a year on inventing better ways of doing what we do and reducing the impact it has on communities and that kind of thing. So that's my job. I'm responsible for all those people. In terms of excitement, I've got lots of that, and obviously the first thing I'm interested in doing is developing things that can help BP do better what it's doing, but I suspect also you're asking the question from the angle of and what do I see in the future of energy in the world. And obviously that gets you into conversations about how we can be more efficient in what we do. A little fun fact, only about 12% of the world's energy captured at source ends up in useful heat, light or motion. The rest is wasted along the way. So that's an awfully big prize to go for in terms of efficiency. And then down the road, there is obviously moving towards a more sustainable energy system. That excites me as well, but that's got a long way off right now. And underneath that are some really whiz-bang sciences, things like nanomaterials and biosciences. Those sorts of things are incredibly high potential for changing the world's energy system. So that's what excites me, I'd say.
Great, thank you very much for your question, Rosie. If we can have the second question from Surbiton High, please.
Okay. I'm Georgia, and I was just wondering, can you explain why you need energy and tell us about some of the places we get it from?
Hi, Georgia. That's a great question. Everything you do actually needs energy, whether you want to have the light on, whether you want to be in a warm or cold house, whether you want to move around the place, and frankly, wear clothes, even what you eat. You'd be surprised how much energy it takes to do that. And this varies around the world. If you live in the UK, which you definitely do, then you use, on average, 125 kilowatt hours a day. I'll try and explain that in a second. That means basically if you sat there with 3 hairdryers going full-time, that's your energy consumption on average if you sit in the UK. Now, if you were in America, you'd have 6 hairdryers, and if you're in China, you'd have half a hairdryer. So we use different amounts of energy, and that's linked into the quality of life we have, how many of the services that are available we can use. And developing countries want to use more and more. And that, plus the population growth, is really driving the demand for energy in the world. As to where it comes from, there are basically 3 places, one of which is fossil fuels. This is coal and oil and gas. The second place is all the renewables, that's sunlight and wind and geothermal and wave and tidal, those sorts of things. And the third one, I think you'd all know, is nuclear. And all the things that have to be dug up are dug up in often some quite difficult parts of the world. So it can be very cold, it can be very hot, it can be very windy or massive waves, those sorts of things. So they tend to be quite concentrated sources of energy, uranium being the most concentrated you can find. And then the more renewable ones are more dispersed. Sunlight is by far the biggest source of renewable energy on the planet. Something like 7,000 times what we need is coming down, all the time on Earth. But it's very distributed, and so the job then is to collect it all up and concentrate it so that you can do what you want to do with it, whether that's drive around in a car or use a hairdryer, for example. So it comes from lots of different places.
Great, thank you very much, David. And if we could have our next question, please, from Surbiton.
Hello, Mr. David. My name is Sakshi, and my question is, what does it mean to produce oil and gas from offshore?
Sakshi, hello. Yes. So most of the world's oil and gas is actually onshore. But about 100 years ago, particularly in America, but also in some parts of what we call the former Soviet Union, they experimented with putting drilling rigs, and these are the things that make holes in the ground to tap into the oil and gas, into shallow water. And then they progressively moved into deeper and deeper and deeper water, because there is oil and gas out there as well underneath the seabed. But when you do that, you have to have longer and longer and longer legs underneath your platform, and you have to hold the platform quite a long way above the sea level, because otherwise if waves come along they'll knock you around the place. And that trend carried on until about the 1980s, and then people started to think about, well, can I do this from a floating vessel, a floating ship or whatever, and started drilling from floating vessels and producing to them. But that's a bit tricky, because your ship moves relative to the seabed, and so all your pipes are moving around the place, and if you bend a fork a lot, you'll know what happens to it. So that's quite difficult. That's the most recent kind of operations offshore. And offshore is tricky. Getting hundreds of thousands of tons of steel in bits out to the middle of the sea and putting it in the right place is not easy. The weather out there can be absolutely atrocious. In the Gulf of Mexico, you have 200-mile-an-hour winds. You can have 90-foot waves coming into, say, the west of Scotland. And these knock people about. In fact, in the history of the North Sea, they've knocked drilling rigs and platforms over, and people have lost their lives. So the weather out there can be absolutely awful, and only in part of the year can you install things. And then people live out there, and there aren't any shops, and there's no, grid or giving you power. So all that stuff has to be installed in the offshore environment. Cinemas and exercise rooms and all these things for people who live out there at weeks on end. So it's a very different kind of operating environment. It's a bit more difficult and more expensive often than doing things onshore. But we have cracked that, and it's been a big business in the UK sector of the North Sea since about the 1960s.
Great, thank you, David. If we could have the next question, please, from Surbiton High.
Hello, my name is Amelia, and my question is that oil and gas are often located in environments with extreme temperatures. Can you give us some more information about this?
Yes, I certainly can, and there's lots of different kinds of extremes we face. I've mentioned some of them already, which is the ones that are about sea and sea states and big winds and big waves and stuff, so I won't talk about that one again. I think the ones that often spring to mind in our industry are the really cold places, and that's at the Arctic. BP has been producing oil and gas on the North Slope, the very northern shore of Alaska, for over 30 years now, and it's very, very cold there. It's minus 50 degrees centigrade sometimes, and obviously people can't work in that environment, so you have to enclose them in facilities, in walls, and keep them warm, otherwise they couldn't work there. And everything tends to freeze up at that kind of condition. Cars don't run very well at that sort of situation. So there are all sorts of challenges in working in very, very cold places, and the obvious one is ice. Everything ices up. The sea ices up. You can't just drive in there with a boat and deliver something. You have to wait until the ice melts in summer. And the big fear people have, I think, if we go offshore in into the Arctic, is what happens if you have an oil spill or something, and how do you manage that under the ice. So ice gives you all sorts of big challenges to manage. And then I'll go to the other extreme of temperature, which is in very hot places. BP has interest in a business in the northwest of Australia, and it can get over 50 degrees centigrade working there. And so you have to do almost the exact opposite. You have to make sure people are shielded from this extreme temperature, and they're cooled down. And if they have to go outside, you have to be very, very careful about their hydration and the temperatures that their bodies reach. And often water's a problem there too. In our business on the west of Australia, a place called Kwinana Oil Refinery, they had very little fresh water there, and so we have had to learn how to take all the municipal water, which is dirty water if you like, and then clean it all up and turn it into water that's fresh enough so that we can use it in our refining system. And we've cut the amount of fresh water we use there from the natural environment by over 90% over the last few decades. So those are the sorts of challenges that we face in these different kinds of environments. There are many others in tops of mountains and depths of sea and all that kind of stuff, but those are two pretty good ones, I would say.
David, following on from that point, the STEM challenge I mentioned earlier, which is for students around the UK, will be looking at challenging environments specifically. I was just wondering if you had any tips for entrants about how to come up with some creative ideas for that.
Yeah, I do have some ideas. It's interesting, we run another challenge in the UK called the Ultimate Field Trip, which is for students at universities. And what we do there is they do their work in teams of 3. What I would say is a very good idea is to try and work with or ask questions of people who are different from you, who think differently. Because when you put people together who think about things differently and have different expertise, you can come up with really fantastic ideas that are better than either one would have come up with by themselves. And then the other thing that occurs to me is, and I would say this as I'm the head of technology in BP, talk to experts. I've got lots of fantastic experts working for me, and one thing I can tell you for sure is that they know more about everything than I do. It's a funny position to be responsible for a group like that. But when you're working on a challenge, it's a really good idea to find people who've got special expertise and talk to them, because they'll give you some super ideas and super advice. You don't have to know everything yourself. What you're doing when you're rising to a challenge is pulling together other people's ideas plus your own ideas and building it into a special and new and creative solution. So those would be a couple of tips I would give you.
That's great, thank you so much. We will actually be working, as I say, with STEMnet on this competition. They're involved, so they'll have some STEM ambassadors, and I think our entrants will be able to contact some of them who should be able to lend some support. I think we've got a couple more questions from Surbiton High now. So if we could have, I think we've got time for probably 2 more, and then we'll have to wrap up. If we could have the first of those 2 questions, that would be great.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth. Where did you go to university, and what was your first job?
I went to Cambridge University. I was there from 1979 to 1982, and I studied engineering. And I got a bachelor's degree in engineering, and believe it or not, the first thing I did was go and work for BP, and I've worked for them for 32 years now, and I was asked to go and work in the southern North Sea, where they produce natural gas from the rocks underneath the southern North Sea. That's just off the land from places like Hull, and I worked there for about 1.5 years on the platforms in the southern North Sea.
Great, thank you. I reckon we'll have time for 2 more actually. So if we could have the second question, please.
Hi, Mr. Eyton. I'm Cecilia. And how has BP as a whole responded to the oil spill on the Gulf of Mexico?
Hello, Celia. Yes, that was a terrible tragedy in our history in 2010, and we have worked very hard indeed to clean up, if you like, after that particular incident, and to try and make all the damage that was done. And the other thing we've done is try to learn as much as we can from what happened there, what other people did, and what we did, and what we can put in place to make sure that has very little chance of ever happening again, both to us but also to the rest of the industry. So we've shared all the lessons learned that we've had with other companies and with the people who manage the industry, the regulators they're called, and so they can put in new and better regulations to make sure that not only can it not happen to us, but also so that it can not happen to anybody else. One unfortunately can't turn the clock back and prevent the terrible things that have happened, but what you can do is work to the best of your ability to make sure it never happens again.
Okay, thank you very much for your response there, David. And if we could have another question, please.
Hello, I'm Hannah. Does fracking pose a risk to our environment?
It's funny, I mentioned the Southern North Sea when I started off in this talk, and one of the very first things I was doing was fracking. This particular technology, which is when you break open the rock so that it can produce more oil or gas out of it, was invented in 1947, as it happens. It's been around quite a long time, and it's what I did when I started working for BP. There are risks associated with every kind of energy, whether it's nuclear or wind power or solar or oil or gas or coal. They all have their risks, and the thing we have to do is to manage them. Yes, there are some risks associated with fracking. People have been concerned in particular about the impact on water. You know, if you break into an aquifer, could you contaminate it? Or if you bring back lots of water after you've done fracturing and you produce back all the water that you put in there and then allow the oil and gas to flow, what do you do with that water? Because often it's got things like contaminants in it. So the really, really important things is that people have high standards of operation in the conduct of their business, and that really is the case for any kind of energy business. In the case of fracking, it's making sure there's very, very good standards in the way in which you drill wells, in the way in which you break them open and produce from them, and the way in which you handle the fluids that come out of them, particularly the water that you may wish to dispose of. And this is increasingly being regulated again by regulators to make sure that people follow the highest possible standards. And then I think the risks are really quite low, also low compared with some of the other forms of energy supply that exist in the world.
Great, thank you very much, David. Now, I've been informed we've got time for one more question from Surbiton High, and then we will be coming to a close. So if we can have the final question, please.
Hello, my name's Tia, and my question is, what's your most favourite thing about what you do?
What I love about what I do is I have to learn something new every single day. The world of knowledge and scientific knowledge is moving and away from me and expanding faster and faster and faster. It's almost exponential. And so the job I've got really is to try and keep up with some of that, to appreciate all the fantastic things that my people are getting involved in, and to support them and motivate them to do what they do. But it's the learning new things every single day that I absolutely love about my job.
Great, thank you very much, David. I'm afraid that is all we have time for today. Thank you so much for joining us and for all your insights, David.
It was a great pleasure. I love doing it. Thank you.
Yeah, we very much appreciated it. And thank you as well to Surbiton High for all your questions. Great to have you on. Thank you very much for joining us. Finally, just to end, you can find out more about what David's role is at BP's website, bp.com. You can also find out more about the Ultimate STEM Challenge and the BP Educational Service at our website, which is bp.com/BPES. And we will be back soon with more Hangouts. But until then, goodbye to David and goodbye to Surbiton High, and we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.